My name is Colleen, and I am 34 years old. Today, I stand in the very heart of the house that my father, Arthur, built with his own two hands. He was the finest and most renowned interior designer in town. To him, a house wasn't just a structure made of bricks, stone, and cement. He always said that every home has a soul, a voice that can only be heard by the one who lovingly tends to it. He passed that trade down to me. Today, I am an interior designer too. He taught me that you should always measure twice before you cut a piece of wood. He believed that hasty decisions were what made buildings weak. I still remember the days he would sit me down in his grand studio, teaching me how to draft blueprints. It has been exactly 3 months since he left this world. Yet, the air in this house still carries his familiar scent, a comforting blend of aged wood, polish, and his favorite coffee. Sometimes it feels like he's about to walk out of a room, adjust his glasses, and tell me that I painted a wall just a shade too dark. But the harsh reality is that he is gone. And the first people to set foot in this house after his passing weren't the ones who loved him. They were my older brother, Lucas, and my older sister, Isabella. Lucas and Isabella hadn't been a part of our lives for years. They were too wrapped up in their own separate, expensive worlds. When Dad was sick, when he needed us the most, they never came to visit. But the day of the funeral, they were standing right in the front row. There were no tears in their eyes, only a strange, restless anticipation. The very next day, Isabella stood in the kitchen and said, "Colleen, this house is practically ancient. The walls are crumbling, and fixing it up will cost a fortune. We all know Dad didn't leave a will. The smartest thing to do is flip it to a real estate agent ASAP and split the cash 3 ways." There wasn't a shred of warmth in her voice. She talked about the house like it was a piece of junk they just needed to dispose of. Lucas was 2 steps ahead of her. He was out on the porch, already on the phone with his lawyers. They couldn't have cared less that every corner of this house was steeped in our father's memory. I begged them to give me at least 6 months. I told them I would restore the house myself, that it was Dad's last living legacy, and we couldn't just hand it over to a stranger. Hearing this, Lucas let out a cold, piercing laugh. "Colleen, you've always worn your heart on your sleeve," he sneered. "But sentimentality doesn't pay the bills. If you really want to fix it up, fine, you can renovate it. If you work for free, the property value goes up, and we'll get a better price on the market." They assigned the work to me like I was the hired help. They thought I was weak. They figured I would be too lost in my grief to notice as they quietly finalized the sale behind my back. But they forgot one crucial detail. I am Arthur's daughter. I quietly accepted their offer. I said yes because a deep, gnawing suspicion was brewing inside me. My father was never careless enough to leave his life's work and the home he loved so much without a will. I was absolutely certain Lucas and Isabella were hiding something, and the truth was buried somewhere inside these walls. For the next few weeks, I threw myself into the renovations. From dawn until dusk, I scraped old paint, repaired the floorboards, and tried to breathe life back into Dad's original designs. It had been an exhausting day. Rain was pouring outside, and I was working in the uppermost part of the house, in Dad's old workshop. It was the space where he drafted his most cherished designs. I was clearing away the dust and moving some old lumber out of the way. Suddenly, a section of the floor beneath my feet gave way slightly. I paused and looked down. One wooden floorboard looked slightly different from the rest. There was a hairline crack running along its edge, something an ordinary person would never notice. But I am a designer. My eyes catch the details that hide from everyone else. I pulled out a pry bar, wedged it into the edge of the board, and gently lifted it. As the wood came away, my breath caught in my throat. Hidden beneath the floorboards was an old, heavy-duty iron safe. It was covered in a thick layer of dust. My hands were shaking violently as I wiped it away to reveal a combination lock. I didn't even have to guess. I knew exactly which numbers my father always used. I dialed in my birthday, November 8th. With a soft click, the heavy door swung open. There was no money or jewelry inside. There was only an old blue leather-bound diary resting on top of a stack of legal documents. I pulled the papers out with trembling hands. The moment my eyes scanned the legal jargon, the ground seemed to drop out from under me. The chill in the room suddenly felt biting. They were power of attorney documents. They stated that my father, being of sound mind, was signing over all of his assets, his bank accounts, and this house, entirely to Lucas and Isabella. But that wasn't the end of the story. Tucked right behind those legal documents was a plain piece of paper. On it was my father's shaky handwriting, writing that had deteriorated drastically due to the cancer medication and sheer weakness. He had written, "If you are reading this, Colleen, it means I am no longer in this world. It also means I made a terrible mistake in judging your siblings. Lucas has been threatening me. He told me that if I didn't sign these papers, he would lock me away in a facility where no one would ever be allowed to visit me. Isabella has drained my bank accounts. I am too weak, Colleen. I cannot fight back. Please forgive me." Tears spilled from my eyes as I read his words. A massive lump formed in my throat. I collapsed onto the cold floor and clutched the diary to my chest. My father, the man who held my hand and taught me how to walk, had spent his final days in absolute agony, and they had never let me see it. Lucas and Isabella hadn't just sold his house, they had sold his life and his dignity. I sat in the dark workshop for a long time. The rain outside was beating against the roof, but the storm raging inside me was far more terrifying. Finally, I wiped my tears away. I wasn't sad anymore. The grief had been entirely swallowed up by a quiet, deep, and calculating rage. The kind of anger that doesn't scream, but silently carves its own path. I placed the papers and the blue diary back into the safe and carefully sealed the floorboard exactly as I had found it. When I walked downstairs, my husband, Sam, was waiting by the door. Sam is the most honest, straightforward man I know. He saw my bloodshot eyes, walked over, and put a hand on my shoulder. "Colleen, what's wrong?" he asked. "You look terrible. Did Lucas call again?" I looked at Sam. I didn't tell him about the safe or the documents. It wasn't the right time. I just managed a faint smile and said, "No, Sam. Everything is fine. I'm just exhausted from the work." That night, while the whole house slept, I stood by the window, staring out into the dark. Lucas and Isabella thought they were so clever. They thought they had effortlessly conned a frail old man and an overly emotional girl. But they forgot that a person who knows how to build a structure also knows exactly how to tear it down from its foundation. I made a silent vow right then and there. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't run to the police and cause a commotion. I was going to draft a blueprint of my own, a trap they would willingly walk into, only to be crushed by their own greed. The renovation was now nothing but a smokescreen. My real work was preparing the silent execution of my siblings' downfall. This was just the beginning. Prêt, the trap is set. The next morning, when the first rays of sunlight hit the room, I was already awake. I hadn't slept a wink. My father's trembling words kept looping in my mind. But when I got out of bed, I plastered a perfectly calm, ordinary expression onto my face. I knew that every morning from now on was going to be a performance. I put on my overalls, tied my hair back with a rubber band, and went down to the kitchen. Sam was brewing coffee. He looked at me, smiled, and said, "Morning, Colleen. What's on the agenda for the house today?" I took the mug, let the warmth seep into my hands, and answered calmly, "Today, I'm scraping the old paint off the living room walls. There's a lot of prep work to do." Sam left for work, and I went back into the old house. It didn't scare me anymore. It felt like an accomplice. I intentionally started the loudest, dustiest job in the living room. I knew one of them would drop by to check on my progress. I was right on the money. Around 1 in the afternoon, a luxury car pulled into the driveway. Isabella walked in, trying desperately to keep her designer shoes away from the debris. She held a handkerchief over her nose and glared at me. "For God's sake, Colleen, look at this mess. Have you never heard of a vacuum cleaner?" I set my sandpaper down, wiped my brow, and gave her a tired, helpless smile. "Isabella, it's old lead paint. You have to scrape it by hand if you want the new coat to stick. What brings you by?" Isabella looked around nervously, checking to make sure we were alone. Then she lowered her voice. "I just came to see if you found any old bank documents or passbooks in Dad's closets. Lucas wants to close out all the accounts permanently so we don't run into tax issues." There was a frantic edge to her voice. She was terrified I was going to find their dirty little secret. I played dumb flawlessly. "No, Isabella, I haven't found a thing. Just termite-eaten wood and old cardboard tubes. Besides, I don't understand any of that legal stuff anyway. If I find anything, I'll just hand it straight to Lucas unread." A wave of profound relief washed over Isabella's face. She let out a long breath and smoothed her hair. "Right. Good. You shouldn't stress yourself out with the legalities. Just hurry up with the paint. We need this place on the market by next month, no matter what." She left, and I went back to scraping the wall. Only this time, I pressed harder. It was obvious how scared they were. A thief is always terrified of their own shadow. After sunset, when the house fell dead silent, my real work began. I went up to the workshop, retrieved the diary and the documents from the hidden safe, and pulled out my laptop. I created a new spreadsheet. On one side, I logged the dates from my father's diary. On the other, I entered the data from the discarded bank statements I had found mixed in with the household trash. As I cross-referenced the two, a horrifying picture emerged. On May 15th, Dad wrote that he was severely ill and there was no one home to take him to the hospital. On that exact same day, $25,000 was transferred directly from his savings into Lucas's personal account. It wasn't a coincidence. It was calculated theft. I kept reading. On June 7th, Dad wrote that Isabella forced him to sign a blank piece of paper, claiming it was for a medical bill. Bank records showed that on that same day, a massive fixed deposit my father had set aside for my future was broken prematurely. The bank had penalized him for early withdrawal, but Isabella hadn't cared. She just wanted the cash fast. Nearly $465,000 had vanished straight into her account. $465,000. That was my father's life savings. The man who would think 10 times before buying himself a new pair of shoes had been picked clean by his own children like vultures. I stared at the laptop screen. I wasn't crying anymore. My eyes were dry, burning with a red-hot fury. The only sound in the room was my own heavy breathing. I gently touched the pages of the blue diary, feeling as though I were holding my father's trembling hands. On the last page he had written, "Colleen, I hope you read this, and I hope you understand I never forgot about you. I was just too weak." "I'm not weak, Dad," I whispered into the dark room. "I'm not weak at all." I shut my laptop and carefully packed all the evidence into a secure bag. I had airtight proof of every fraudulent transaction, but I knew if I marched into a police station with this, Lucas would use his high-priced lawyers to spin it. They would argue Dad gifted them the money willingly, and that I was just a bitter sibling fighting over an inheritance. To take them down, I needed someone who knew the legal loopholes better than Lucas did. I needed a trap they would walk into willingly. I pulled out my phone and texted an old friend who worked at a top corporate law firm. "I need the number of the sharpest, most ruthless private investigator in the city. It's an emergency. It was 2 a.m. The rain had stopped, and a pale moonlight filtered through the clouds. I turned off the workshop lights and headed downstairs. The blueprint was finished. It was time to pour the concrete. Tomorrow, the countdown for Lucas and Isabella would officially begin. The House of Cards. The next morning, before the city had even woken up, I left the house. The sky was still hazy, and the streets were dead quiet. Gripped tightly in my hand was the bag holding the dark truth of Arthur's final days. Thanks to my lawyer friend, I had secured an early meeting with the best PI in town. His name was Marcus. We met at a rundown diner on the outskirts of the city. Marcus was already there, sitting in a corner booth, nursing a black coffee. He was a quiet man in his 50s with piercing eyes that missed absolutely nothing. I sat down across from him, opened my bag without a word, and slid the blue diary, my spreadsheet, and the bank documents across the table. Marcus looked at me, then began silently thumbing through the paperwork. For 30 minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rustling of paper and the occasional car passing by outside. I held my breath, trying to read his expression, but he looked completely unfazed. He'd seen it all before. Finally, he took off his glasses, set them down, and let out a heavy sigh. "Colleen, your brother and sister executed this very cleanly. They exploited your father's failing health and used legal maneuvers to drain his estate. If you take this to the cops, they'll write it off as a civil probate dispute and bury it in paperwork." My heart pounded. I leaned over the table. "But Marcus, he wrote in his own diary that Lucas threatened him. Isn't that enough?" Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "Courts run on hard, undeniable facts, not emotions. Lucas's lawyers will argue your father was suffering from dementia and paranoia, and that the diary is pure fiction." I slumped back in the booth. It felt like everything was slipping through my fingers. But then, a cold, calculated smirk crept across Marcus's face. He slid a document back toward me and tapped a date with his finger. "But when people get too cocky, they almost always make a sloppy mistake. Look here, Colleen. The day Lucas had this power of attorney signed and notarized, he wasn't even in the state." I gasped, looking closer at the paper. "I did a little digging on your brother last night," Marcus continued. "On that exact date, Lucas was in Chicago closing a business deal. That means he either sent an imposter to sign for him, or he bribed a dirty notary to backdate the stamp. And in the eyes of the law, Colleen, that isn't a family dispute. That is a massive felony." A rush of adrenaline hit my system. Dad's unfinished truth was now a loaded gun. I looked Marcus dead in the eye. "So, what's our next move?" Marcus closed the file, his voice low and dead serious. "We lay a trap. We make Lucas and Isabella think they're winning. We corner them into a situation where their own greed forces them to make a fatal error. We won't beat them in a courtroom. We'll let them hang themselves with their own rope." We strategized for 2 hours, mapping out every single detail. By the time I walked out of that diner, the weight on my shoulders was gone. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I had a partner who knew exactly how to play the game. By midday, I was back at the house, keeping up the renovation charade. I was scrubbing down the old kitchen cabinets when Lucas's car roared into the driveway. He barged through the front door, tossing his expensive coat onto the sofa, and stormed straight into the kitchen. He wasn't acting calm today. He looked rushed, and he looked angry. "Colleen, what the hell is this?" he snapped from the doorway. "You're taking 3 days to paint one damn wall. I spoke to a top-tier realtor this morning. He's coming to appraise the house next week. I need this place staged and ready to go." I set my rag down and looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Lucas, you know old woodwork takes time to prep. Dad always said if you want a job done right, you can't rush it." Hearing Dad's name made Lucas see red. He pointed a finger in my face, his voice dripping with venom. "I don't give a damn about Dad's lectures, Colleen. This is my house now. You will do exactly as I say. I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull here, but hear me clearly. If you get in the way of this sale, I will physically drag you out onto the street myself." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't let a single ounce of fear or anger show on my face. I played the submissive sister perfectly, keeping my eyes glued to the floor. "I'm sorry, Lucas," I whispered timidly. "I won't get in your way. It'll be ready by next week." Lucas gave a smug, arrogant smirk. He thought he had broken me. He turned on his heel and walked out without another word. The second the door clicked shut, I looked up. There was zero fear in my eyes. I rested my hand on the old wooden doorframe and thought, "You're prepping the house for a sale, Lucas. I'm prepping you for a prison cell." Now it was time to deal with Isabella. According to Marcus's plan, we needed to drive a wedge between them. A thief's biggest weakness is greed, and when there's money on the table, there is no honor among them. I was going to exploit that completely. Sowing the seeds of doubt. The next 2 days passed in eerie silence. It was the calm before a devastating storm. I kept up the work, and the house was starting to shine, but my real focus was entirely on the snare Marcus and I had set. On Wednesday morning, I called Isabella. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Her tone was as condescending as ever. "What is it, Colleen? Why are you calling so early? Did you finish the painting?" I injected just the right amount of panic and mystery into my voice. "No, Isabella, there's still work to do. But last night, when I was cleaning out Dad's closet, I found a really strange file. I felt like I needed to tell you before I mentioned it to Lucas." Isabella, always hyper-vigilant when money was involved, changed her tone instantly. "A file? What kind of file, Colleen? What's in it?" I took a deep breath, lowering my voice to a whisper. "I don't know, really. It looks like bank records. There's a mention of a massive withdrawal made in June. Almost $465,000. I thought maybe you knew about it, but only Lucas's name is on the paperwork, and it transferred to some out-of-state account." Dead silence on the other end of the line. The bait had been taken. The seed of doubt was firmly planted in her greedy mind. After a few tense seconds, Isabella managed to control her trembling voice. "Colleen, do not show that file to anyone, especially not Lucas. Do you understand me? I'll be there in 30 minutes. I hung up, a cold smile spreading across my face. Less than half an hour later, Isabella's red sports car screeched to a halt outside. She practically ran inside. She hadn't even finished her makeup. She looked haggard, her eyes wide with panic. She marched straight into the kitchen, where I was casually sipping coffee. "Where is it, Colleen? Let me see the file right now." Acting as calm as could be, I pulled a folded piece of paper out of my apron pocket and handed it to her. It was a forgery Marcus had mocked up the night before. A highly convincing bank statement showing Lucas transferring the exact amount of her stolen money into a private offshore account. Isabella snatched the paper from my hand. Her eyes darted wildly over the numbers. The longer she read, the paler she got. "This is impossible," she muttered. "Lucas told me Dad's CD only had 100 grand in it, which we split 50-50. He lied to me. He played me. He kept the $465,000 for himself." I looked at her, the picture of innocence. "What's wrong, Isabella? Didn't Lucas tell you? I thought you two handled all the paperwork together when Dad was sick." She didn't even look at me. Her hands were shaking with pure rage, crumpling the paper in her grip. She gritted her teeth and spat. "He's always been a selfish bastard. He terrorized Dad, and now he's screwed me out of my cut. But I am not letting him get away with this. I'm going to his office right now." I reached out and gently touched her arm. "Isabella, stop. You know how smart Lucas is. If you go screaming at him, he'll deny everything, hide the money, and you'll get nothing." She finally looked at me, tears of greed and betrayal brimming in her eyes. "So what do I do, Colleen? Let him walk away with my money?" I dropped my voice to a soothing register. "No. If you want your money back, you have to prove he committed fraud against Dad. I know a guy, a private investigator. He can help us. But you have to give him the whole story. Tell him everything Lucas did to force Dad's hand. If we get it all on the record, Lucas will be forced to settle, and you'll get your full share." Blinded by fury and dollar signs, she agreed without a second thought. She just wanted her payout, even if it meant throwing her own brother under the bus. I gave her Marcus's office address and told her to meet us there at noon. As she walked out the door, I took a deep breath. Half the battle was won. There is no honor among thieves. That afternoon, I sat in Marcus's office alongside Isabella. She was nervous, but her greed completely eclipsed her fear. Marcus hit record on his audio device and started asking the questions. Isabella spilled everything. Through fake tears, she confessed how Lucas threatened to institutionalize our father. She explained how Lucas bribed a shady notary to backdate the power of attorney while he was in Chicago. She even admitted that Dad was so weak he couldn't hold a pen, and Lucas had physically forced his hand to sign the paper. Every word out of her mouth felt like a knife to my chest. My poor father had been so helpless, but I swallowed my tears. I couldn't break character now. Once the recording was finished, Marcus had Isabella sign a sworn legal affidavit detailing her confession. Isabella thought she was securing her payday. What she didn't realize was that she had just signed her own arrest warrant. She was fully implicating herself as an accessory to elder abuse and grand larceny. When she finally left the office, Marcus looked at me and flashed a grim smile. "We got him, Colleen. We just secured our nuclear option. The truth." I looked out the window at the setting sun. Tomorrow, I was inviting Lucas over. Tomorrow, the curtain was dropping. The house that had silently witnessed months of greed and betrayal was about to turn into a courtroom. I was ready. Checkmate. When I woke up the next morning, an eerie sense of peace washed over me. It was the feeling you get when a grueling marathon is finally over. I had finished the house renovations the night before. The walls gleamed with fresh paint. Yet somehow, my father's comforting scent still lingered in the air. Today was the day I got justice for Arthur. By 3 p.m., I had dragged Dad's massive, heavy oak table into the center of the living room. On top of it, I meticulously laid out the blue diary, the bank records, and Isabella's signed confession. It wasn't staging for a real estate showing, it was the bait for the trap. Right at 3:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. It was Marcus. He gave me his usual reassuring nod and stepped inside. 10 minutes later, Isabella arrived. She looked incredibly anxious, fully believing she was about to extort her cut of the money from Lucas. She had no idea she was about to burn in the very fire she helped start. The three of us sat in the living room as the clock ticked away. Outside, dark storm clouds were rolling in again. Exactly at 4 p.m., a sleek luxury car crunched on the gravel outside. Lucas was here. He strutted through the front door with his usual unchecked arrogance. He was wearing an immaculate tailored suit and a winner's smile, fully expecting to finalize a lucrative real estate deal and walk away rich. But as he entered the living room and saw Marcus and Isabella sitting there, he froze. His brow furrowed. He glared at Isabella, then snapped his gaze to me. "Colleen, what is this? Where is the realtor? And who the hell is this guy?" I gestured calmly toward the empty chair across the table. "There is no realtor coming today, Lucas. Have a seat. What we're about to discuss is going to be very hard for you to hear standing up." Lucas glared at the chair but refused to sit. His anger flared. "Don't play games with me, Colleen. I don't have time for your theatrics. If there's no buyer, I'm leaving." He turned toward the door. "If you walk out that door, Lucas," Marcus's booming voice echoed through the room, "there will be 3 squad cars waiting for you at the end of the driveway. I suggest you sit down. The color instantly drained from Lucas's face at the mention of the police. Suddenly, that expensive suit looked 3 sizes too heavy. He slowly sank into the chair, his eyes darting to the blue diary and the documents on the table. I took a deep breath and looked him dead in the eye. You thought Dad was weak, Lucas. You thought you could terrorize a sick, elderly man, steal his life's work, and sweep it all under the rug. But you forgot one thing. A man who knows how to build mansions knows exactly how to build a rock-solid foundation. I picked up the forged power of attorney and slid it across to him. You forced him to sign this when you weren't even in the state. You were in Chicago, Lucas. You bribed a notary to backdate the stamp. In the eyes of the law, that isn't just a loophole. It's a massive felony. Sweat beaded on Lucas's forehead. He tried to scramble for his usual bravado. This is a bluff. You're trying to frame me. That document is bulletproof, and my lawyers will destroy you in court. I offered a thin smile and looked at Isabella. Your lawyers might be able to spin a document, Lucas. But how are they going to spin Isabella's sworn affidavit, the one she recorded with Marcus yesterday? Lucas whipped his head toward Isabella, his eyes wide with a terrifying fury. He gritted his teeth. Isabella, what the hell did you do? Isabella was trembling violently, but her greed was still piloting the ship. She cried out, You screwed me, Lucas! You drained $465,000 from his account and lied, saying there was only $100,000. I am not letting you run off with my money. I told them everything. I told them how you threatened Dad and forged the papers. Lucas completely lost it. He lunged out of his chair toward Isabella, but Marcus was faster, shoving him hard back into his seat. Keep your hands to yourself, Lucas, Marcus growled. This isn't a family squabble anymore. This is a criminal investigation, and you are both sinking in quicksand. Lucas stared at the papers, completely defeated. He knew it was over. His own sister had stabbed him in the back over a paycheck, but Isabella still foolishly thought she was walking away clean. She wiped her face and looked at me. Okay, Colleen, I helped you nail him. Give me my cut of the money now. I don't care about the house. Just wire me my half. My voice dropped to a whisper, cold as ice. Isabella, do you really think you're walking away from this with a payday? You sold out our father on his deathbed. That confession doesn't just nail Lucas. It nails you, too. You admitted on paper that you were a willing accessory to elder abuse and grand larceny. Isabella's jaw dropped. The reality of what she had done finally hit her. Blinded by greed, she had quite literally handed us the rope to hang her with. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing hysterically. I gathered the documents and clutched the blue diary to my chest. The only sounds in the room were Isabella's wailing and Lucas's heavy, panicked breathing. I walked toward the front door, stopped, and looked back at them one last time. Dad always taught me that if a house has termites, you have to rip them out by the root. Today, that's exactly what I did. This house and every cent you stole is going to a charity that protects elderly people from being abused by their own children. You aren't getting a dime. I walked out the front door with Marcus. The rain had started to fall again, but this time it felt incredible. It felt like the sky was finally washing all the filth out of my father's house. Lucas and Isabella were going to pay for what they did. The police were already on their way. I got into the car and let out a long exhale. My phone buzzed. It was Sam. I answered with a real smile. I'm coming home, Sam. It's over. It's finally over. A new foundation. After that day, the house my father built fell completely silent. But it wasn't the silence of an ending. It was the quiet preparation for a massive legal battle. Lucas and Isabella were arrested that same evening. I watched from the window as the police escorted them out in handcuffs. Lucas's sharp suit was wrinkled, and Isabella's pride had completely melted away into tears. But I knew Lucas wouldn't go down without a fight. He immediately hired an army of the most ruthless defense attorneys in the city. Almost 3 months later, the trial began in the city's highest court. The courthouse was a cold, imposing building made of heavy gray stone, devoid of any emotion. My father used to say that stone is unforgiving until a master carves a soul into it. The air inside the grand courtroom was freezing. I sat on the wooden bench right behind this prosecutor's table, Sam holding my hand tightly. Marcus sat next to us, holding the heavy file of evidence and the blue diary. Soon, Lucas and Isabella were let in. Lucas was still wearing a tailored suit, but the arrogance was gone. Deep, dark bags hung under his eyes. Isabella looked utterly broken. She sat as far away from Lucas as physically possible, hunched over in her chair. The bond between them was completely dead. Greed had burned their relationship to ash. The judge took the bench, and a heavy silence blanketed the room. Lucas's lead defense attorney spoke first. He was a slick, articulate man. He immediately began spinning his web. "Your Honor, this is not a case of fraud. This is the tragic result of a jealous, greedy younger sister who is upset with her inheritance. My client, Lucas, deeply loved his father, and Arthur willingly gifted him the estate. Colleen, an interior designer, used her unrestricted access to the house during renovations to manipulate documents." My blood boiled. He was taking my father's love and his final agonizing days and twisting them into a cheap lie. But Sam gave my hand a gentle squeeze, grounding me. I had to stay calm. The prosecutor called Marcus to the stand. Marcus walked up with slow, deliberate steps. He looked directly at the judge and said in a calm, authoritative voice, "Your Honor, you can dress a lie in a $3,000 suit, but it's still a lie." Marcus opened his file and presented the notarized power of attorney. This is the document that supposedly transferred the estate. However, on the exact day this document was signed and stamped, Lucas was not even in the state. He was staying at a hotel in Chicago. I have submitted the hotel receipts and flight logs to the court. A man cannot exist in two cities at the exact same time. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Lucas's attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He shuffled his papers, but he had absolutely no defense against cold, hard logistics. Next, it was Isabella's turn. To secure a lighter sentence, she had agreed to turn state's evidence. As she shakily walked to the witness stand, Lucas glared at her with enough hatred to kill. Through heavy sobs, Isabella confessed to everything. She testified about Lucas's threats to put Dad in a home. She explained how the bank accounts were drained, and she admitted, on the record, that she had gladly taken her cut of the stolen money. Isabella's testimony was the final nail in the coffin. Lucas slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. It was over. But the trial wasn't finished. The prosecutor called my name. I stood up and slowly walked to the stand, gripping my father's blue diary. Standing there, I looked out across the room, at Lucas, Isabella, Marcus, Sam, and the judge. "Colleen," the prosecutor asked, "what would you like the court to know about your father?" I took a deep breath. Tears pricked my eyes, but this time I let them fall. My father, Arthur, wasn't just a brilliant designer. He was a fundamentally good, honest man. He taught me that buildings aren't held up by stone and wood. They're held up by trust. With trembling fingers, I opened the diary to the very last page. I don't want to speak for him. I just want to read the words my father wrote in his final days. I read aloud into the microphone. "If you are reading this, Colleen, please forgive me. I couldn't fight back. Lucas has terrified me. They have taken my life's work. But I know you will fix this. You are my best designer." When I finished, you could hear a pin drop in that massive courtroom. Even the judge's eyes looked a little glossy. I closed the diary, looked up, and spoke with absolute clarity. "I am not asking the court for a dime, Your Honor. I do not want a single dollar of that money. I only ask that the estate and the house be transferred to a foundation that protects vulnerable elderly people from the children who abandon them. That is the only true justice for my father. I stepped down from the stand and walked back to Sam. It felt like a mountain had been lifted off my chest. I had done exactly what my father believed I could do. I had salvaged his legacy. The judge didn't take long to deliberate. The evidence was insurmountable. Lucas was sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary for fraud and elder abuse. Isabella, due to her cooperation, received a reduced sentence of 3 years. As the bailiffs led Lucas away in handcuffs, he paused right in front of me. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, empty stare. "You destroyed everything, Colleen," he muttered. I looked him dead in the eye, feeling absolutely zero hatred. "I didn't destroy anything, Lucas. I just stopped a building from collapsing after you let the termites into the foundation." He was led away. Marcus walked over, patted my shoulder, and said, "You did good, kid. Your old man would be incredibly proud." We walked out of the courthouse. The sky was crystal clear, and the afternoon sun was warming the heavy gray stones of the building. Sam held my hand tightly as we walked to our car. After a long, terrifying night, a new, peaceful morning had finally broken. I didn't have to renovate an old house anymore. Now it was time to design a brand new blueprint for my own life. It has been exactly 3 years since the verdict. On the outskirts of town, the house my father built still stands tall and proud, but its identity has completely changed. It's no longer a private residence. It is now the Arthur Care Foundation. I kept the promise I made in that courtroom. Every cent Lucas and Isabella stole, and the deed to the house itself, was handed over to the foundation. Today, the house is a sanctuary for abandoned elderly people who were betrayed or displaced by their own families. It's a beautiful Sunday morning. Sam and I are sitting in the expansive front lawn. Around us, some of the residents are soaking up the sun, some are reading, and others are swapping old stories. Seeing the deep sense of peace on their faces makes me realize that my father's soul is finally at rest. Dad always said a house isn't built with mortar and bricks. It's built with the smiles of the people living inside it. Today, his old upstairs workshop has been converted into a massive art studio where the residents paint and build small wooden toys. Every now and then, I think about Lucas and Isabella. Lucas is still sitting behind the cold, hard walls of a prison cell. My lawyers tell me he barely speaks anymore. His arrogance, his expensive suits, and his ruthless ambition are all permanently buried in the dark. Isabella's sentence will be up in a few months, but she knows that when she gets out, she has no home and no family to return to. They traded their own blood for a payout, and all they bought was an eternity of loneliness. To be honest, I don't hate them anymore. To hate someone, you have to reserve a space for them in your heart. And I simply don't have any room left for them. I have left them to their fate. I stand up and walk inside the house. The living room where we sprung our trap on Lucas is now a massive communal dining area. I walk up the stairs and into Dad's old workspace. In the corner, the floorboard covering the hidden safe is still there. I've sealed it shut permanently, but my father's blue diary is still with me. I took it to my own home. Whenever I hit a rough patch, or feel scared to make a major decision in life, I open to that final page and read it again. "I know you will fix this, Colleen. You are my best designer." Dad was absolutely right. I am a designer. But I didn't just redesign walls and rooms. I redesigned my entire life. I ripped out a rotten, termite-infested foundation, and I poured a new one, built entirely on truth, trust, and love. Sam comes up behind me. He rests his hands on my shoulders, gently turns me around, and kisses my forehead. He doesn't say a word, and he doesn't need to. We've both become fluent in the language of silence, the kind of silence where true peace lives. Marcus still checks in on us too. He's no longer just a private investigator. He's become a trusted, loyal friend of the family. My name is Colleen, and this was my story. A story about refusing to let my dignity die just to keep the peace. If you have ever been betrayed in your own home, or if someone has taken advantage of your love and your kindness, just remember this: family isn't defined by blood. It is defined by truth, and it is defined by respect.